So we're going to move on then to the next session, and after the next session, we'll then have a break. So I hope everybody can manage to work through and not have any too much caffeine deprivation for a little bit. So going on to the next session, loosely titled International Perspective, we've got three guests that are joining us, two from Australia and one from London. The first guest is Professor Tony Fry from University of Tasmania. And then we have Dr. Sharon Pittman from Green Adelaide, the National Park City in Adelaide, Australia. And finally, we have Andy Young, who is a partner with Bark Ingalls Group. They're a global multidisciplinary firm. He's based in London. Each of them will be bringing their own perspective about these sort of issues. So again, they will be joining us online. And so I'm going to turn it over initially to Professor Anthony Fry. Tony, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for joining us at such a late hour. But glad you're here.
Oh, I'm pleased to be here as well. Nice to be with you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking really from a different place. I'm looking out at the world, and I'm looking back towards you from my place in the world, on the basis that I both work in Australia, but I also work in other places currently, Colombia, Brazil, and Germany. But my ambition is really to kind of shift some of the perspectives. And some of the things I'm going to say are going to be challenging and controversial. Okay, so I've got, as you see, a number of statements, and I'm just going to work through them. The first one is that we're at a moment of epochal change. We are, in a shorthand sense, at the beginning of a heat age. And it could be, by the end, one of the most significant changes since the end of the Ice Age. And the perspective on it is really that what we've been doing with anthropocentric global warming is actually amplifying a process that's already in play. The interglacial cycle of the planet, which is a cycle of warming. So the perspective there is that it is going to go on warming for several thousand more years, irrespective of whatever we do. All we've done is added to that trajectory. So there is no short-term resolution. We're going to have to change and adapt irrespective of however well we do in terms of emissions reduction, and we're not doing very well at the moment. So that's the first statement. The second one is the IPCC has projected that by mid-century, there could be 1 billion people displaced. By the end of the century, that could have risen to 2 or 3 billion people. This will mean a massive, and I mean massive, humanitarian crisis beyond any current ability to cope with that situation. It also collides with a massive food security crisis, as well as an international security problem. 1 billion people displaced, 1 billion people on the move is going to cause huge problems in terms of people crossing borders, people entering cities en masse, and so on. So geopolitically, globally, although this is still a few decades away, the issue is not being confronted really at all. And it really changes the picture, and it certainly changes it economically. Statement number 3, we need to think and act in time. And what I mean by that, we need to act in the medium of time, and we need to act with a sense of urgency. Now, at the moment, space still rules. We are really both paralyzed in terms of time and underdeveloped in terms of acting in time. And one of the reasons for this is that we suffer from chronophobia, a fear of time, an illusion of permanence, an inability to think in time. So we've heard today talking about 20, 30 years. and I've mentioned that warming is going to continue for several thousand years, we need to be thinking at the very minimum toward the end of this century and beyond. All the modeling on climate data takes us up to 2300. So we're really not coping with change in that respect. And the point about climate change, it isn't just the environment that's going to change. We are going to change. We are, in a sense, a product of climate. Very evolutionarily. The color of our skin, what we eat, our size, all of those things were a result of movement over time in climate. So if the climate changes, we are going to change. So we can't just objectify the situation. It actually implicates us. Statement number 4, relocation action. We are going to have to move. I've been working since 2009, really on that whole question of relocation. It started when I was a member of a team of 40 designers chosen to relocate the city of Gällivare in northern Sweden. I've done a lot of things in between, but currently I'm working with colleagues from 4 Australian universities on a discussion paper and exhibition on a national relocation strategy for Australian communities at risk. This is all being launched in June in Canberra. We've already had one sitting, the city of Lismore in northern New South Wales, population of 26,000, that was wiped out by flooding. The city has literally been destroyed. There are many parts of Australia that are going to become uninhabitable. And that also goes really for the globe. So one of the places I'm working, this statement number 5, is Colombia. The question of displacement in Colombia puts that global picture into perspective. It is in the south bisected by the equator. The equator bisects northern Brazil, that cuts across Central Africa, Sumatra, Borneo, many Indonesian islands. Above and below the equator is going to get incredibly hot. Many of those places will be abandoned and the people will be abandoned. We're looking at temperatures in excess of 50 degrees centigrade plus and rising. In Australia, we've already had temperatures on that line. We've already experienced in a few places 50 degrees. So that's a big agenda. Statement number 6, just talking about the abandoned, the 1 billion and the more. Their means of survival is going to depend on bricolage, the ability to survive through whatever they can find, whatever they can put together with what they can find. And there is already a history of that in relation to informal communities, which in the global south can be up to 70% of the city. If we look at that picture, if we look at, for example, Lagos in Africa, projected by the end of the century with a population of 80 million people, those people are going to be really entirely dependent upon bricolage. So the global south and the global north are, on the one hand, a distinct geography, but they also enfold each other. They are also in each other's location. And one of the key ways in which people in that context survive is through a concept called cosmotechnics, the technical knowledge embedded in tacit knowledge of everyday practices, that it directly connects to what I've just said about bricolage. So none of these things get onto the agenda of, for example, resilience. These are far more basic, far more foundational, far unable to be kind of corralled into a kind of a managerial management model. But what one is, which is number 7, is retrofitting. Retrofitting cities means essentially retrofitting, taking up to an urban scale, focusing on repair, dealing with what already exists across the infrastructure, the built structure, and the social and the economic structure. And really, it means acting, in a sense, in a similar way to resilience in terms of prevention. But it is critical of resilience insofar as, and it's been demonstrated today, it's cast dominantly from a global north perspective. Retrofitting is led by repair and adaptation at a really basic level. It's about people dealing themselves with what exists, with whatever resources they have and can find, with a bottom-up kind of improvisation sensibility. It is really what people are going to be forced into doing and already doing in the global south. At the other end of the spectrum, there is a kind of a move that's already occurring amongst economic elites. Billionaire CEOs are now buying islands. There is a kind of a move in that respect. There's more general on that, around techno-enabled survival, from singularity to decamping on rules. So there's really 3 perspectives that we need to be able to confront. There is the abandoned, there is the extreme elite, the small proportion, and then there's everybody in between, which in today's context is us. And the kind of imperative over the next few decades through the end of this century and beyond is going to be adaptation, design, and repair. My projection is that retrofitting is going to be really the dominant planetary door regime. The design retrofitting represents is what can arrive from an unassisted perspective, which from the global south is going to be the owning option. So finally, the last perspective is really the political. The situation we're in, the future that is arriving environmentally, is a compound problem. It doesn't have one face. It is geopolitical, it's socially economic, it's environmental, it's climatic. And it really presents us really with a major problem. The way in which these things are currently thought and addressed politically is not really providing the pathway to solution. It actually folds into the problem, a problem which is traveling towards us from the future. Institutional politics is really out of touch with the events that are unfolding in time. It is structurally myopic, operationally dysfunctional, and trades in redundant ideas. Currently, nationally and geopolitically, political regimes of all stripes are not dealing with the crisis that is coming to humanity. They're not confronting it. There is fundamentally a crisis of political imagination, a crisis of lack of insight, a lack of foresight. Extant politics is not fit for purpose in terms of the world that is unfolding. Now, these are things that I've worked on, I've written about, I've published on. I'm not in any way claiming to have solved the problem. Of course, I haven't. But I'm trying to respond to it. And I'm using response as a very deliberate category because so many of the situations that we face do not have solutions. We are not going to solve warming. We're not going to stop the displacement of vast numbers of people. But what we have to do is that we have to respond to these situations. So I put response in front of solutions. Finally, in terms of Plymouth, I'm just going to say something very simplistic. I'm going to say that Plymouth should begin to start retrofitting now. And why I'm saying that is it doesn't require the development of a large program. It doesn't require government funding. It requires an action that generates continuous momentum over time. It would be possible to generate that momentum from today with this event. The activity of retrofitting is basically letting an idea loose and creating a material, practical momentum around that idea. It doesn't require a sophisticated concept. It requires creation of a sensibility that allows everybody everywhere to act in response to the problem. So, thank you. By the way, I'm going to send Bob just a short list of references for anybody who wants to follow up on the things I've been saying.
Many thanks for that, Tony. Very much appreciate you're able to join us again at such a late hour, but thank you for the very useful provocations. Our next speaker is Dr. Sharon Pittman, again from Green Adelaide, and she is online.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Sharon.
So someone I have a lurgy, not the dreaded lurgy, but another dreaded lurgy. So excuse my speaking voice and the occasional cough. I'm sorry about that. But good, I see you have my slides. Okay, so I'm really sorry that I've missed the intro. So that's not giving me much context, which is very sad. But look, I'll do my best to tell you about our story. And myself, I'm the project lead for Adelaide being a national park city. You've probably heard of the National Park City movement, which in fact began in London. And London is the first national park city in the world. We're the second, and there's a few about to join us this year. I also have a mixed background, multidisciplinary. I was a creative writer in the early part of my career and a teacher. And then I've worked in revegetation and habitat restoration and in green infrastructure, sustainable landscapes. I've worked in science communication and currently with Green Adelaide. I'll tell you a little bit about that. So my story is about Adelaide becoming a national park city. And I think you'll find it also tells a story about us as inclusive of land and sea. As we're all aware, cities now are our primary human habitats, and increasingly so all around the world, projected to grow by about 60% or more by 2050. And that's a lot of growth taking place right now. So they're challenged by a multitude of issues. We've got growth, density, congestion, pollution, poverty, public health issues, waste management, competing interests, in many places, urban heat, climate change, and often isolation and disconnection from nature, which itself leads to many problems in many ways for people. So we've known for a long time that we need a new vision for cities if they're going to be happy and healthy places. And a new vision is what this movement is all about. So I work for Green Adelaide in South Australia. It is a branch of the state government for Department of Environment and Water. and it has its own board, the Green Adelaide Board, and we're the only city in Australia that has such an entity. It's a statutory authority, and it's tasked with managing the urban landscape of Greater Adelaide, and that is the city and the surrounding suburbs and environment of approximately 1.3 million people. So local government has some responsibilities and Green Adelaide has others. But Green Adelaide is the key coordinating body across the greater metropolitan area and partners with local government to achieve bigger picture outcomes. Ratepayers, so property owners, pay a levy which provides the financial support for Green Adelaide. Now, the Green Adelaide footprint involves 17 local government jurisdictions. Each have their own elected councils and staff. And geographically, it includes plains, hills, creeks and rivers, the coastal environment, and a marine park, and of course, the CBD. Now, it was Green Adelaide that was asked to make Adelaide a national park city, and it really was the correct organisation to do this because having Green Adelaide is a key strength. It's a body that can bring all the places and all the people in the greater metropolitan area together. So the National Park City movement, which is the context for this, was formed in the latter years of last decade in response to the challenges facing cities. And it began with folk in London getting together with people from World Urban Parks and the Salzburg Global Institute. And it was to create a way for cities to move forward and make important changes in their health, and in particular to the role of nature in the city. Many what-if questions were asked, and basically these were about what if things could be a whole lot better in a whole lot of different ways. So much work went into planning a pathway forward and creating movement that would have traction around the world. Adelaide was actually involved from quite early on. An international forum was hosted here in 2018, and the Universal Charter was developed, and the criteria for being a national park city began to be formulated. So it was a very rigorous process, in fact, with many criteria to address. We had to gather a lot of evidence. We had to consult with our traditional owners, our local government organisations, non-government organisations, other government departments, and create our own bespoke charter that everyone agreed with, the people involved agreed with, and then go through an assessment process. And there was a lot of community engagement around this process, and luckily a media campaign by our local newspaper as well was helpful. So we gathered well over 2,000 signatories from the public to the charter, and we produced a documented version of our complete submission, and you can see the cover of our creative portfolio there. It is available online. Personally, I'm very proud of it, and it's brilliant bedtime reading with lots of pictures. So if you want to read what it is, what we're about, what our story is, there you go. But I need to be clear, this is not just about what we already do and have and are. It's about our commitment to a journey ahead. So it's to improving our city's relationship with nature. We'll never get there. We'll never reach the end. It'll be a continual journey. But it's also about refreshed opportunities to bring the whole of Greater Adelaide, and that's why we call the city of Adelaide plus the surrounding suburbs, along on a journey towards cooler, and in our case, we do aim for cooler, more livable, more resilient place with more engaged and empowered communities. So I don't know if any of you have ever visited South Australia or Adelaide, but Adelaide is long with over 100 kilometres of coastline. The city itself lies between the sea and the hills. There's a few small creeks and rivers that flow out to sea. And it's built primarily on a biodiversity hotspot. So biologically rich, yet largely cleared and quite ecologically damaged. And so, as you would know, most cities are actually built on the most fertile and productive places, creates issues. So we have these 17 local government jurisdictions called council, and they're inside the green line. And the Ghana Native Title Claim, the orange line, they're our traditional owners. And the Adelaide National Park City sort of falls between the two. We have a soft boundary. We go out up into the hills and then out into the marine environment, and we're not restricted to local government boundaries. So becoming a national park city requires the development of a bespoke charter based on the Universal Charter that was originally developed, but a bespoke one that addresses our place and our people. So our charter provides an outline of what we aspire to achieve. So you can see those 7 dot star points there. So it's about basically being cooler, greener, wilder, being rich with nature, and having better connections between people and nature. Essentially, it's about striving for greater health and resilience. And this charter was created through working with local government, with the Kaurna, the traditional owner community, and several community members and leaders. And through working through generally in these 7 areas, in collaboration with our partners, with local government and other supporters, we think we can make a difference. And we highly value working with the First Nations people who lived on this land tens of thousands of years before European settlement. And that's a very critical thing that we need to be aware of. So once we had been through that process and we became a national park city, we needed to have a public launch. So we chose the whole month of June 2022 for a public celebration of Adelaide being a national park city. And we had about 160 events outdoors and indoors and online. And the point of this is to demonstrate the very many ways to involve people and bring people and nature together, all ages, many cultures. Actually, all of the images on the top line there are from the opening event, which was the reconciliation event, which was at Warraparinga Wetland, which was a fair with cultural activities and stands and music. But then we had 160 odd other events, and these included outdoor things like walks in the hills, along the plains, along rivers, through parks. We had a geocaching event. We had kayaking on our reservoirs. We have reservoirs in Australia that are our water supply, and they've been recently opened up in South Australia so people can walk around them, kayak on them, things like that. We had camping. We had a beautiful, in the bottom one, artist's mandala made on the beach, one of our local beaches. We had a lot of planting events because in June, that is a good month for planting in our geographical situation. We plant at the end of autumn so plants can get established during winter so that they can survive the hot summers without too much maintenance. We had gardening events and we had botanical art classes, so indoor and outdoor botanical art classes. And then indoors we had things like sustainability tours, zero waste dinners, which were fantastic in a major supermarket, art classes, performances, some theatrical performances involving local wildlife, exhibitions, story times in libraries, so nature-themed books in libraries for children, talks, presentations and games. And online, we had a couple of webinars. And our very final official event was the launch of the Adelaide National Park City Airport artwork at the Adelaide Airport. And that had some government ministers and some VIPs as well as cultural leaders. So a local artist in the purple there, Lucinda Penn, created a mural for us for our creative portfolio, which was a depiction of Adelaide with the hills and the sea in the sort of long, thin aspect. And we loved it so much, and it's been so delightful that it's become a focus in the identity and communications of Adelaide National Park City. And she painted this, that's her and her partner Harry, who helped by hand on a wall, great big painting in Adelaide Airport to welcome people to Adelaide. And I'm pleased to say it's still there. So this brings, of course, many challenges, but also many opportunities. The challenges are considerable and always will be. Ecological health in the urban landscape will always be a challenge. we have climate impacts, we have canopy inequity. So one of the big problems identified here is that the wealthier suburbs tend to have more trees and more canopy, which is very good for shade, for temperature control, for biodiversity. And the less well-off suburbs tend to have much less canopy, much less trees, less vegetation. So that's an inequity we're looking at. Lack of ecological literacy. That was the focus of my PhD, how much people know about nature and how it works. So there's definitely a lack of ecological literacy in the community. We have the public health and wellbeing issues, tree laws and legislation, or lack of tree laws and legislation that we would really aspire to. But then the opportunities are many too. So in connecting with and learning about nature, in particular with the less engaged and the culturally and linguistically diverse communities, working with First Nations in how to care better for country, increase and improve our living infrastructure or our green infrastructure, to influence planning, to encourage innovation, to provide leadership, and of course, contribute to conversations about the future. Because essentially, nature-based solutions must be part of an inclusive planning process to mitigate against and adapt to climate change, to restore functional ecosystems and improve environmental health, but also to improve human health, physical and social and mental and spiritual. So we've learned a lot, and we accept the value of science, technology and innovation, and we now also increasingly understand the value of nature in cities for a myriad of benefits. So on this journey, and we've only been on this journey for a couple of years, Green Adelaide is a bit longer than that, I think 3.5. But on this journey of being a national park city, some of the things we've done since the public launch, where we involved the broader community, we've developed some concepts of 50 ways to get involved, which are really just ideas and springboards. We've made them into posters in different languages. We're the major sponsor of the, sorry, my throat is giving up, the annual Nature Festival of South Australia, which has just finished its 4th year and had over 28,000 people attending in 2023. So that's growing every year. We support and participate in a range of activities and expos and science festivals, forums and conferences. We partnered in the World Urban Parks Congress, which took place in Adelaide last year, which was an international and a local congress. We work with the education sector in a number of ways. And you can see in the bottom of the slide, it's a beautiful book that we've been publishing for a couple of years, which is a celebration of science and nature. And this is by students of South Australia. So they read books in schools, they read books about science, nature, STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, but we've added nature, we've added space. And then the winning entries in all the different categories we've published and spread them back into the schools and back to the kids. So sorts of things like that. But we're also connecting with other sectors such as health and planning, and of course, promoting Green Adelaide's work in heat and canopy mapping, which is using LiDAR technology to map the heat island, to map the canopy and find the places where we need to prioritise urban greening. But in fact, many people just contribute to Adelaide being a national park city by the things they do in their daily lives. So we encourage home gardening, right through to joining groups and volunteering or painting or just going for walks, doesn't matter. And our job is really to be a connector and a communicator, tell the stories and work to inspire. These are some more pictures from our launch. We're a national park city because we're on a journey together to make our cities healthier for ourselves, and for the plants and the wildlife that call our cities home. So it's about community, culture, inclusion, equity and collaboration, about learning and understanding and enjoying urban nature, and that includes the plains and the hills and the rivers and the coast. It's about human health, physical, mental, social, spiritual. It's about biodiversity and sharing our city with plants and animals, supporting the web of life. and about influencing change in behaviour and attitude, but also where we can in policy and planning. And so there are fantastic opportunities. We just have to grasp them. So we're proud to be a national park city. We're very fortunate to have an entity such as Green Adelaide to work from. We recognise that we do need to do better in bringing people and nature together. We do need to become cooler and more climate resilient, or we don't have a great future. And so we're very pleased to be part of a growing family of cities around the world that support each other along this journey to improvement. And that's what I have for you, and I hope that that's useful in the context. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pittman. Really enjoyed hearing about that and very informative. Our next speaker is Andy Young, partner at Bark Ingalls Group. Right. Thank you very much, Andy. We have maybe about 10 or 15 minutes for a bit of questions and discussions. I'll just begin at very quickly by one of the things that I felt came through in the three talks was they all shared a sense of having a particular or distinct vision that was driving them. Whether it was about the idea of metrofitting as a distinct way forward in the context of significant challenges, or the idea of integration of nature and the city that we've heard from Dr. Pittman, or in Andy's talk that bringing together, co-joining of...
In progress.
Thank you. The bringing together of the environmental with the economic and understanding how those things can mutually benefit each other, but also understanding the cultural role that they can have. So that was my sense of it, but I want to turn it over now to the audience, and we are going to use the other microphone, and I hope I don't get some very bad feedback here. So if anybody has any questions or comments they wanted to raise, we need to use this so that everybody on the other end can hear us. So turn it over to you as the audience. I'm going to pick up on that before asking Andy to respond. One of the conventional ways of providing resistance to sea level rise is to build a seawall. Now that's been thrown into disfavor because of the environmental impacts of it, but for the sake of this discussion, let's pretend that a seawall is okay. Conservative estimate on construction of a seawall is £5,000 per linear meter, up to £10,000. I've even come across pricing at £17,000 per linear meter. By my very, highly untechnical measuring of Plymouth City coastline, going along the Tamar, along the Hoe, back up the Plym, on the other side of the Plym, you're looking at about 33 kilometers. So to achieve building a seawall to protect all of Plymouth will cost at a minimum £165 million, or maybe £330 million. That's a huge kind of dent in the city council's budget. So I just want to put into people's minds the idea that a seawall is a conventional way of responding to a threat of the sea is not necessarily the panacea that people may think it could be. There may be other alternatives that have to be looked at.
Are you thinking of managed sea?
That's, I think, for part of the discussion to open up. But I want to give space, particularly to Andy, to respond to the question that Keith has asked here now. But I think it's a good point you've raised, Keith.
I can do that, and I can also say that we at BIG are the architects of New York City, or the Manhattan Flood Defense Initiative. So we are the master planners of that, and we looked at that in a very different way from usual, which is not incompatible with what I just showed you. So if you can bear with me in a minute, I will try and find some material on it, and then maybe can share it. But the way that was both conceived and eventually partly financed was through some lateral thinking. Now, there is a way to build flood defence for a city, which is a whole bunch of concrete walls which deliver the correct level. It's worth noting that in Aarhus in Denmark, the harbour had originally been built with future sea level rising in mind, so it was not an issue. You'll notice a significant level change between the ambient sea level and the quayside. But in New York, what we actually did was tapped into the parks, gardens, and amenities budget of the city, and provided a design for flood defence there, which uses after Superstorm Sandy. Obviously, there was a colossal impact on mainly the insurance industry, but also business continuity in New York City. As a response to that, our winning scheme for that was to provide effectively a kind of bermed approach, which actually puts some facilities and public realm outside of the flood defence area in such a way that in the event of another superstorm coming, it might well get damaged and need repair. But if essentially the flood defence itself was delivered through the enhancement of public amenity, which was partly financed via the money available for public amenity. So that would be my answer.
Good. Thank you for that. And Dean, I'm just picking up on Keith's quick comment about the idea of managed retreat. That's certainly one of the things that I think has been talked about globally. I think picking up on what Andy was just saying about the Bark Ingalls scheme, if you're not familiar with that and or other approaches like it, just imagine a giant sponge at the water's edge as a way of dealing with the impact of that. Anyway, yes.
The main challenge. I'm not particularly familiar with Plymouth, and I missed the first part of the meeting, so I'm not particularly familiar with what your challenges are in particular. But every city, the whole point of the National Park City movement is every city is completely has its own challenges and its own opportunities. So you just develop, your plan, your charter is yours. It's specific to you. It's what you want to achieve, what you want to aim for. It's your vision. It's putting your vision together from your community. It doesn't have to be like anyone else's. We've learned a lot of lessons by going through the process. It is a rigorous process. There's 22 criteria plus a creative portfolio of some kind, but all of those criteria are around place, are about ambition, vision, what you aim to achieve, what you have, and where you want to go, about inclusion and equity, involving people, involving the community, about your capability, about your support, the community support. So all of the criteria revolve around those things. And what we found was that while it was rigorous, we ended up with a story that we hadn't, no other way would it have come together. No other way would we have collated all of that together and say, wow, this is where we've been, this is what we used to be, this is where we are now, this is where we'd like to go, and these are all the component parts. And that was the beauty of it for me, bringing that whole thing together so that it's a much clearer picture of our journey.
Thank you for that. Time for one final question at the back. I don't know if, I don't know if anybody here from Plymouth City Council necessarily wants to pick up on that, but so I'll stick my neck out because I'm not a representative of Plymouth City Council. And I think one of the things I would say is Plymouth City Council is involved in much bigger partnership that embraces the South Hams and West Devon, and there's dialogue and plans in place about how they move forward. And I know that's part of, as Dr. Pittman was suggesting, it's part of a journey. It's an ongoing discussion. It is not a fixed thing. So for me to say, well, it's about this, no, it's something that's going to continue to evolve. I think your question's very apt here and very much on the spot in terms of what we're trying to achieve here, to start to break down some of those conventions of thinking about what Plymouth is in using Plymouth just because everybody recognizes, but understanding that Plymouth historically did not limit itself to being something, say where we're at or down on the Hoe or down on the Tamar. It had connections back to the hinterland, via the mining, via the agriculture. It's always been part of a bigger system. It's only in recent years that we have developed a way of thinking to think of it as a kind of distinct entity, and somehow food or products magically appear here. I think we need to reinvigorate some of that historic thinking to understand that all of these things are interconnected. I think for me, if there's anything coming out of today's workshop, it's really to highlight exactly what you're saying, that we cannot think in isolation anymore. We need to understand how things start to mutually benefit each other. I hope that works for the council, but how we achieve that, I think, which is part of your question, is a big challenge. And I think we'll be hearing from Elaine Hayes from National Marine Park shortly. And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, they had 17 or 18 authoritative bodies to deal with in terms of the negotiations. And I think that was, the main challenge. How do you bring all of those well-minded organizations together, but get them all lined up to pursue a particular agenda? So we can say, yes, let's get things joined up, but recognizing it's not an easy task. I hope that suffices an answer to your question, which I think is very appropriate. With that in mind, I think we're going to have to end this particular session. I want to thank again Professor Fry, Dr. Pittman, and Andy Young for joining us, taking time out of their busy day or evenings for our guests from Australia. Really appreciate you sticking around into the late evening hours to join us. Thank you for your inputs. Thanks everybody for your attention so far. We're now going to have, if we can, about a 15-minute break. There's tea and coffee outside, and then we'll be starting up. And when we come back, Dr. John Martin will be leading the next session, and we will be hearing from Matt Bell, Hannah Harris, and Elaine Hayes. Thank you very much. Cheers.